Security Chief Blork ran 3 of his 7 tentacles across the pristine control panel of Zeph Station's main security checkpoint, while the remaining 4 sorted through the morning's intelligence reports with practiced efficiency. As the primary screening facility for the Galactic Council's most sensitive diplomatic meetings, Zeph Station represented the pinnacle of interspecies security technology. Nothing, and Blorks took considerable pride in this fact. Absolutely nothing dangerous had ever made it past his scanners, not in 12 standard cycles of operation. The station's reputation preceded it throughout the galaxy. When species needed to conduct delicate negotiations without fear of assassination, sabotage, or the occasional ceremonial disembowelment, they came to Zeph Station. Blork's security protocols were legendary among his peers, discussed in hushed tones at law enforcement conferences across 17 sectors. Chief, his deputy, a nervous flicket named Ping, chittered from the secondary console. The Earth delegation's transport just docked at Bay 7. Ah, yes. The humans. Lorg's eye stalks swiveled to review the species file floating on his personal display. Homo sapiens. Bipedal mammals from a Class 12 death world. The classification alone should have warranted extreme security measures. But Council regulations demanded equal treatment for all recognized species. Still, Lorgs had taken precautions, extra scanners, additional guards, and his personal favorite, the new Mark 7th molecular displacement field that could detect weapons at the subatomic level. Bring up the checkpoint feeds, Lorgak commanded, settling his bulk more comfortably into his specialized chair. Let us observe these Deathworlders in action. The holographic displays flickered to life, showing the security checkpoint from 17 different angles. Standard procedure for any visiting delegation, but Blorks found himself paying closer attention than usual. Something about Deathworld species always made him professionally curious. In his experience, beings from high-gravity, predator-rich environments tended to be creative when it came to violence. The first humans to enter the checkpoint moved with the careful politeness of experienced diplomats. Their leader, according to the manifest, was one Ambassador Marina Chen, a middle-aged female with graying hair and laugh lines around her eyes. She approached the scanning station with what could only be described as cheerful cooperation. "Good morning, Security Chief," Marina said, somehow managing to make her universal translator sound genuinely warm. "I understand we need to go through some security procedures before the reception." Blorg activated his external speakers. "Indeed, Ambassador. Standard diplomatic protocols require all weapons, dangerous devices, and potentially hazardous materials to be surrendered for the duration of your visit." Marina's smile brightened considerably. "Of course. Safety first, as we say on Earth." She began removing items from various pockets and holsters with the efficiency of someone accustomed to such procedures. "Let me see. There's my plasma knife. Quite sharp, I'm afraid. And this neural disruptor barely used. I promise. Oh, and this little beauty here is a molecular destabilizer. Picked it up on Rigel Station." The pile of surrendered weapons grew steadily. Blorg found himself genuinely impressed by the humans' collection. For a species supposedly committed to peaceful diplomacy, Ambassador Chen certainly came well prepared for alternative outcomes. "Is that everything, Ambassador?" Blorg inquired, running a preliminary scan over the accumulated arsenal. A lunch fork. The human was surrendering her lunch fork. Several of Blorg's junior technicians began snickering behind their consoles. Ping's chittering took on the distinctive tone of barely suppressed laughter. Even Blorgs felt his confidence surge. Here was a Deathworld species so thoroughly domesticated by civilization that they worried about eating utensils. "Your cooperation is exemplary, Ambassador," Blorg said, allowing a note of condescension to creep into his voice. "Please proceed through the final scanners for verification." Marina stepped through the molecular displacement field, which immediately confirmed what Blorg already knew. She carried no concealed weapons, no hidden devices, no dangerous substances of any kind. The scanners registered her as completely harmless, just another soft diplomat from a species that had traded its predatory heritage for committee meetings and trade negotiations. "Wonderful! All clear, I assume?" Marina's innocent smile seemed to light up the entire checkpoint. "I do so appreciate thorough security measures. Makes everyone feel safer, doesn't it?" Something about that smile made one of Blork's eye stalks twitch involuntarily. For just a moment, the briefest instant, he could have sworn he saw something else behind those friendly brown eyes. Something that reminded him why Earth was classified as a death world in the first place. But the moment passed, and Marina Chen was just another harmless human diplomat. chatting pleasantly with his guards about the station's impressive architecture as she collected her visitor credentials. 2 hours later, Blorgak monitored the grand ballroom from his security office, watching dozens of feeds that captured every angle of the evening's festivities. The reception hall of Zep Station was a marvel of architectural diplomacy, designed to accommodate the varied environmental needs of 43 different species, while maintaining an atmosphere of refined elegance that would make even the most pretentious Altarian feel at home. Ambassador Quilth, a magnificently plumed avian from the Kepler Consortium, had outdone himself with the evening's arrangements. The bird-like diplomat strutted between groups of guests with the self-satisfied air of someone who believed his own press releases about bringing civilization to the outer reaches. His elaborate tail feathers, each one worth more than most beings earned in a standard cycle, rustled importantly as he gestured toward the ceremonial contract displays. Such a momentous occasion, Quilth proclaimed to anyone within hearing range, his translator adding unnecessary flourishes to every syllable. New trade partnerships, expanded cultural exchange, the very foundation of galactic prosperity being laid before our eyes. Marina Chen had positioned herself near the refreshment alcove, engaged in what appeared to be pleasant conversation with a cluster of mid-level trade officials. Blorg adjusted one of his surveillance feeds to pick up audio from her general vicinity. "Oh yes, Earth's agricultural sector is quite robust," Marina was saying, her tone suggesting she found the topic genuinely fascinating. "We've had remarkable success with modified grain varieties. Increased yields, improved nutritional content, resistance to various atmospheric conditions." A Zephyrian counselor, his crystalline form refracting the ballroom's ambient lighting into prismatic patterns, leaned forward with the patronizing interest of someone explaining basic concepts to a child. "How? Of course, truly advanced civilizations have moved beyond such primitive concerns as agriculture. We Zephyrians subsist entirely on synthesized nutrients, perfectly calibrated to our biological requirements." "How efficient," Marina replied, her smile never wavering. "Though I imagine you must miss the simple pleasure of tasting something that grew in actual soil." The Zephyrian's prismatic face somehow managed to convey condescension despite lacking recognizable features. "Primitive sensory attachments, Ambassador. Civilized beings learn to appreciate more sophisticated pleasures." Similar conversations were occurring throughout the ballroom. Blorgak watched as various species took turns explaining to the human diplomat how proper galactic citizens conducted themselves. The Altarians lectured her about emotional restraint. The Centauri delegation offered unsolicited advice about appropriate diplomatic attire. Even the normally reserved Andromedans felt compelled to share their thoughts on human developmental potential. Marina absorbed it all with the patience of someone accustomed to being underestimated, nodding politely and asking just enough questions to keep her condescending educators talking. Blorgak found himself grudgingly impressed by her diplomatic stamina. The atmosphere shifted abruptly when the Skreet delegation finally made their entrance. Commander Hisok led his contingent through the ballroom's main doors with all the subtlety of an orbital bombardment. The insectoid species had a reputation for aggressive negotiation tactics that made most civilized diplomats nervous, and Hisok embodied their militant culture perfectly. His chitinous exoskeleton bore the ritual scars of 17 different combat campaigns, while his mandibles clicked in patterns that Blorgak's translator identified as barely restrained hostility. "Apologies for our delay," Hisek announced, his voice carrying across the ballroom like grinding metal. The Skreet Empire had more pressing matters to attend to than this gathering of soft-bodied merchants. Quilith's feathers ruffled with obvious displeasure, but his diplomatic training held firm. "Commander Hisek, we are honored by your presence. Please join us in celebrating these new partnerships." "Partnerships?" Hisek's mandibles clicked in what could only be interpreted as disdain. "The Skreet Empire finds it curious that the Galactic Council seeks to expand trade relationships with lesser species." The insectoid commander's multifaceted eyes swept the ballroom until they fixed on Marina Chen. Blorgak felt his tentacles tense involuntarily. In 12 cycles of security work, he had developed reliable instincts about brewing trouble, and those instincts were currently screaming warnings. "Ah," Hisek continued, his attention locked on the human diplomat, the representative from Earth. "How disappointing to see the Council lowering its standards to include soft mammals in galactic affairs." The ballroom fell noticeably quieter. Even the most socially oblivious delegates could sense the shift in atmosphere. Marina's smile remained perfectly in place, but Blorg noticed her posture change almost imperceptibly, a subtle adjustment that somehow made her appear more focused. Commander Hisek, Marina said, her tone maintaining its cheerful diplomacy. How nice to finally meet you. I've heard so much about Screet military achievements that your pathetic species could never comprehend, Hisek replied, moving closer to the human. Humanity's reputation precedes it, a race of cowards who compensate for their weakness with primitive weapons and desperate alliances. Blork watched other delegates inch away from the confrontation. The Zephyrians dimmed their prismatic glow. The Altarians studied their drinks with sudden fascination. Even Ambassador Quilth seemed to have found something urgent to discuss with his aide across the room. Marina's smile stretched slightly, taking on a quality that made Blork's earlier unease return with renewed intensity. I can understand why you might think that, Commander. Humans do tend to be resourceful when faced with challenging situations. Resourceful? Hisek's laugh sounded like metal scraping against stone. Your species hides behind technology because you lack the courage for honest combat. Without your weapons, humans are nothing but frightened prey animals. Blorg's attention snapped to full alert as he watched Commander Hisek reach for one of the ceremonial goblets from the refreshment table. The Screet delegation favored a particularly potent fermented beverage, something that could dissolve most organic materials if spilled carelessly. The fact that Hisek was handling it while clearly agitated sent warning signals through every one of Blorg's security protocols. Perhaps the human would care to sample authentic Screet hospitality, Hisek said, raising the goblet toward Marina with exaggerated courtesy. Marina inclined her head politely. How thoughtful of you, Commander, but I'm afraid human digestive systems aren't quite. The accident happened with choreographed precision. Hisek's gesture became suddenly expansive. The goblet tilted at exactly the right angle, and the corrosive contents splashed across the front of Marina's formal diplomatic dress. The fabric began dissolving immediately, leaving smoking holes in the expensive material, while releasing wisps of acrid vapor into the ballroom's atmosphere. Oh dear, Hisek said, his mandibles clicking in obvious satisfaction. How terribly clumsy of me. I do hope your pathetic human reactions don't include excessive emotional distress over such a minor mishap. Blorks found himself leaning forward in his chair, all 7 tentacles focused on the surveillance feeds. Marina Chen stood perfectly still for several heartbeats, looking down at her ruined dress with an expression that remained frustratingly unreadable. The corrosive liquid had eaten through layers of fabric and was still smoking gently, but the human diplomat showed no signs of panic, anger, or even mild annoyance. Accidents happen, Marina said finally, her voice maintaining its diplomatic warmth despite the circumstances. I should probably freshen up before the contract signing ceremony. Wouldn't want to appear disheveled for such an important occasion. She turned to address Ambassador Quillith, who was watching the exchange with barely concealed horror. Ambassador, if you could direct me to the nearest facilities, I'll just need a few minutes to make myself presentable. Of course, Quillith fluttered, clearly eager to defuse the situation. Down the corridor, second alcove, on your left. Take all the time you need. Marina smiled graciously and began walking toward the indicated exit, her movements unhurried and composed. Logek switched his primary feed to follow her progress through the station's corridors, curiosity overriding standard protocol. Something about the human's reaction, or rather her complete lack of reaction, struck him as professionally significant. Instead of heading directly to the refreshment facilities, Marina made a slight detour through the ballroom service area. Lorg watched as she paused at the auxiliary refreshment station, where elaborate displays of exotic foods were arranged for the guests' enjoyment. Her movements became more purposeful as she examined the serving implements with what appeared to be casual interest. Fascinating craftsmanship, Marina murmured, apparently to herself as she lifted a decorative fruit knife from its position among the other utensils. The blade was perhaps 6 inches long, crafted from some kind of ornate metal that caught the ambient lighting beautifully. Blorg's eye stalks focused intently as Marina tested the knife's balance with subtle movements of her wrist. Her fingers found the grip with practiced ease, and she made a few experimental motions that looked distinctly professional. Alert! Blorg commanded his security team through their comm system. Human diplomat in Service Corridor C has acquired a potential weapon. Respond immediately. 2 guards materialized from concealed positions with impressive speed, their weapons drawn but not yet targeted. Ambassador Chen, one of them said, his translator adding official authority to his tone. Please surrender the implement immediately. Marina looked up with genuine surprise, as if she had forgotten she was holding anything at all. Oh, this old thing. She glanced at the knife with apparent confusion. I was just admiring the workmanship. Whoever forged this has remarkable skill. The balance is absolutely perfect. Station regulations prohibit unauthorized possession of potential weapons, the second guard stated, extending his collection device. Please deposit the item for immediate confiscation. Of course, Marina said, placing the knife into the containment field with cheerful compliance. I apologize for any confusion. I'm afraid I have something of a professional interest in metallurgy and craftsmanship. Old habits from my university days. You understand. The guards exchanged glances that clearly communicated their shared opinion of human, intellectual pursuits. Your cooperation is noted, Ambassador. Please proceed to your intended destination. Marina nodded pleasantly and continued toward the refreshment facilities, leaving the guards to catalog their confiscated weapon with smug satisfaction. Blorg watched the entire exchange with growing unease that he couldn't quite articulate. There was something about the humans' behavior that reminded him of predators he had encountered in his youth. The way they moved with deceptive casualness while constantly evaluating their environment for opportunities and threats. But Marina Chen was just a diplomat from a civilized species, and his guards had performed their duties flawlessly. The potential threat had been identified and neutralized before any actual danger could develop. Still, as Blorg returned his attention to the ballroom where Commander Hisek was regaling other delegates with exaggerated accounts of his accident, he made a mental note to increase surveillance on the human diplomat for the remainder of her visit. When Marina returned to the ballroom 15 minutes later, Blorg immediately noticed two things that defied logical explanation. First, her dress appeared to be completely intact, no holes, no stains, no evidence whatsoever of the corrosive incident. Second, Commander Hisek had used her absence to transform what had been a diplomatic reception into something resembling a military tribunal. As I was explaining to our distinguished colleagues, Hisek was saying, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, the Screed Empire has serious concerns about expanding trade relationships with unreliable partners. The other delegates had arranged themselves in a rough semicircle around the Screed commander, but their body language suggested discomfort rather than engagement. Ambassador Quilth's feathers were pressed flat against his skull, a clear sign of stress in his species. The Zephyrian counselor had dimmed his prismatic glow to barely perceptible levels, while the Altarians studied their feet with sudden fascination. Earth's recent attempts to establish shipping routes through contested sectors demonstrate a troubling disregard for established territorial agreements. Issa continued, his mandibles clicking with each emphasized syllable. The Screed Empire cannot allow such aggressive expansion to threaten regional stability. Marina approached the group with the same pleasant composure she had maintained throughout the evening, but Blorg noticed subtle differences in her movement patterns. Her steps were quieter, more measured. Her hands hung at her sides in a relaxed position that somehow looked professionally ready for alternative applications. Commander, Marina said, rejoining the conversation as if nothing unusual had occurred. I hope I haven't missed anything important. Hisek's multifaceted eyes fixed on her with predatory intensity. The human returns. How convenient. His gaze swept over her restored appearance with obvious displeasure. I see you have managed to repair the damage from our earlier mishap. Typical mammalian vanity, always preoccupied with superficial appearances. Clean uniforms do tend to project a more professional image. Marina replied, her smile never wavering. I find that attention to detail often reflects one's commitment to the task at hand. Task at hand? Hisek's laugh sounded like grinding metal. Your only task, human, should be explaining to your superiors why Earth must withdraw from these negotiations immediately. The ballroom fell silent. Even the ambient music system seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere and reduced its volume to barely audible levels. Blorgak found himself adjusting multiple camera angles to ensure complete coverage of what was clearly becoming a critical diplomatic incident. The Screed Empire controls 17 major shipping routes in this sector. Hisek continued, moving closer to Marina with each word. Should Earth persist in these foolish territorial ambitions, we would be compelled to implement protective measures. Blockades, cargo inspections, perhaps the occasional tragic accident involving human vessels that stray into dangerous regions. Marina tilted her head slightly, as if considering his words with genuine interest. That sounds like a threat, Commander. Are you officially threatening Earth's trade vessels on behalf of the Screed Empire? I am stating facts, Hisek replied, using his considerable size advantage to loom over the human diplomat. Regrettable facts about the hazards faced by species that overestimate their capabilities. The other delegates remained frozen in uncomfortable silence. Ambassador Quillup opened his beak as if to speak, then apparently thought better of it. The Centauri representative took a step backward. Even the normally assertive Andromedans seemed content to let the confrontation proceed without their input. Hisek moved closer still, effectively cornering Marina against the ornamental wall panel behind her. His chitinous form blocked most escape routes, while his mandibles clicked in patterns that Blork's translator identified as ritualized dominance display. "Of course," Hisek said, his voice dropping to a more conversational tone that somehow made his words more menacing. "Diplomatic accidents can occur anywhere, even in the most secure facilities. A tragic fall down a maintenance shaft. An unfortunate reaction to exotic cuisine. So many ways for careless visitors to miscalculate their safety margins." For the first time since her arrival at Zep Station, Marina Chen's smile faltered. Blork watched as the human diplomat's expression shifted subtly, her brown eyes moving in quick, precise patterns that suggested she was rapidly assessing her immediate environment. Her hands remained relaxed at her sides, but her weight distribution changed almost imperceptibly, a shift that made her appear somehow more grounded, more stable, more dangerous. "Commander Hisek," Marina said quietly, her diplomatic warmth finally replaced by something that made Blork's security instincts scream warnings through every nerve ending he possessed. "I think there may have been a misunderstanding about human capabilities. What happened next would be analyzed in security footage for years to come." Though Blork would never quite believe his own eyes despite watching it unfold in real time across 17 different camera angles. Commander Hisek, emboldened by what he interpreted as human submission, reached out with one of his primary manipulator arms to grasp Marina's shoulder. His chitinous digits were halfway to their target when the human diplomat provided what could only be described as a comprehensive education in Deathworld physics. Marina's response began with a slight pivot of her left foot, a movement so subtle that most observers would dismiss it as a minor adjustment for balance. Her right elbow, however, had apparently received entirely different instructions from her nervous system. It moved in a sharp ascending arc that intersected with Hisek's thoracic cavity at precisely the point where his species stored their primary breathing apparatus. The impact produced a sound like a hammer striking a bell, followed immediately by a wheeze that suggested the Screet commander's respiratory system had encountered an unexpected operational challenge. Hisek's eyes went wide, all 17 of them, as his body attempted to process what had just occurred. Before the insectoid could fully comprehend his situation, Marina's educational demonstration continued with a second movement that displayed an intimate knowledge of Screet anatomy that was definitely not included in standard diplomatic briefings. Her left elbow found the nerve cluster at the base of Hisek's neck with surgical precision, applying just enough pressure to convince his nervous system that standing upright was no longer a viable option. Commander Hisek, veteran of 17 military campaigns and terror of 3 different star systems, collapsed like a controlled demolition. His trajectory carried him backward into the ornate refreshment table, which had been designed to showcase the finest delicacies from across the galaxy. Crystal goblets exploded in prismatic showers. Exotic fruits splattered against the ballroom's walls in patterns that would have been artistic if they hadn't been so thoroughly devastating to the evening's ambiance. The commander's final resting position involved him being draped across the remains of the ceremonial ice sculpture, which had been carved to represent the harmony of interspecies cooperation. The irony was not lost on anyone present. "Oh dear," Marina said, stepping back from the wreckage with apparent concern. "How clumsy of me." She dusted off her hands with the same casual attention one might give to removing lint from a sleeve. Her diplomatic smile returned in full force, bright and cheerful and somehow more terrifying than any expression of anger could have been. "I do hope you're not injured, Commander," she continued, moving toward the groaning insectoid with what appeared to be genuine solicitude. "Human reflexes can be so unpredictable when we're startled. I'm afraid we haven't quite evolved past our fight-or-flight responses." Blork's security feeds captured every detail of the aftermath with crystal clarity. The other members of the Screet delegation, 4 heavily armed warriors who had been positioned strategically around the ballroom, began moving toward their fallen commander with obvious hostile intent. Their mandibles clicked in patterns that Blork's translator identified as combat preparation protocols and authorization for lethal response. Then they got a clear look at Hisek's condition. The commander was conscious but appeared to be experiencing some difficulty with basic motor functions. His attempts to stand resulted in uncontrolled movements that looked more like interpretive dance than military bearing. When he tried to speak, the sounds that emerged suggested his translator was having trouble processing whatever signals his brain was attempting to send. The advancing warriors stopped so abruptly that one of them actually skidded on a piece of scattered fruit. They stared at their leader, then at Marina, then back at their leader, their multifaceted eyes processing information that didn't align with any of their tactical training scenarios. Perhaps someone should call for medical assistance, Marina suggested helpfully, addressing the room in general. I'm not familiar with Screet physiology, but he seems to be having some sort of episode. Ambassador Quilth, who had been frozen in shock since the first elbow strike, finally managed to activate his emergency protocols. Medical team to the diplomatic ballroom, he squawked into his communicator, his voice climbing several octaves above its normal range. We have diplomatic incident, requiring immediate attention. I should probably file an incident report, Marina mused, apparently addressing herself. Workplace safety is so important in diplomatic settings. From his security office, Lork found himself updating his assessment of human capabilities in real time. His tentacles moved across multiple control panels, flagging the encounter for immediate review by Council security analysts, while simultaneously revising his understanding of why Earth was classified as a death world. The human diplomat stood serenely among the wreckage of what had been an elegant diplomatic reception, her smile as warm and genuine as it had been when she first surrendered her lunch fork at the security checkpoint. Lorg's security team arrived at the ballroom in full tactical formation, their weapons drawn and their sensors sweeping for immediate threats. What they found instead was a diplomatic reception that looked like it had been struck by a small meteorite, one groaning Screet commander who couldn't seem to remember how his legs worked, and a human diplomat who was offering helpful suggestions about first aid procedures. Perhaps we should elevate his feet, Marina was saying to the medical team that had just arrived. I believe that's standard procedure for shock in most species, though I confess I'm not entirely familiar with Screet physiology. Lieutenant Crix, Blork's second in command, approached the scene with obvious confusion. His scanner readings showed no weapons discharge, no energy signatures, no evidence of any technological intervention whatsoever. According to every sensor on the station, Commander Hisik had simply fallen over. From his security office, Lorkuk was frantically reviewing the incident footage at multiple speeds and angles. Each replay confirmed what his instruments were telling him. Marina Chen had never drawn a weapon, activated a device, or used anything more sophisticated than the joints in her arms. The devastating precision of her movements suggested training that went far beyond diplomatic etiquette, but the technique itself required nothing more than basic human anatomy. The realization struck him like a cold solar wind. Humans didn't need weapons because they were weapons. Every Death World species in the galaxy carried their survival adaptations with them wherever they went, but most civilized beings had forgotten that this included their physical capabilities. Ambassador Chen, Ambassador Quilth demanded, his feathers still ruffled with indignation. I must insist on an explanation for this unprovoked assault on Commander Hisek. Marina looked genuinely puzzled by the accusation. Assault? Oh no, Ambassador, I think there's been a misunderstanding. She gestured toward the groaning Screet commander with apparent concern. The commander was reaching toward me quite suddenly, and I'm afraid I was startled. Human reflexes can be somewhat emphatic when we're surprised. Startled? Quillet's voice climbed another octave. You destroyed half the refreshment table. Yes, that was unfortunate. Marina agreed sadly, but as you can see from your own security recordings, I didn't use any weapons or devices. Your sensors would have detected anything like that, wouldn't they? Lieutenant Crix consulted his readings again, his confusion evident. The scans show no prohibited technology, no weapons discharge, no evidence of premeditated violence. Marina nodded approvingly. Exactly. Which suggests that poor Commander Hisek may have suffered some sort of medical episode, perhaps an unfortunate bout of vertigo. The symptoms certainly seemed consistent with a sudden loss of balance. The medical team was helping Hisek into a mobility chair, his attempts at protest emerging as incoherent clicking sounds. His warriors maintained their distance, apparently uncertain whether their commander's condition was the result of human treachery or some embarrassing medical condition they didn't want to acknowledge. I do hope he recovers quickly, Marina continued with genuine-sounding sympathy. These diplomatic receptions can be so stressful. Perhaps the excitement simply overwhelmed his system. Blorgak watched the entire exchange through his monitors, slowly coming to terms with the fact that his Death Worlder-proof security measures had been completely irrelevant. He had confiscated Marina's weapons while failing to recognize that she had arrived as one. The human diplomat continued offering helpful observations about Screet medical care while standing among the wreckage of his carefully planned reception, her smile as innocent and diplomatic as ever. The contract signing ceremony that followed proceeded with remarkable efficiency. Commander Hisik had been transported to the medical bay for observation and treatment of his mysterious balance disorder, leaving his delegation notably subdued and cooperative. The other species who had spent the earlier part of the evening lecturing Marina about civilized behavior now found urgent reasons to review legal documents rather than engage in casual conversation with the human diplomat. Such productive negotiations? Marina commented cheerfully as she reviewed the final trade agreements. I do appreciate how much more focused everyone has become. Ambassador Quilth, whose feathers were slowly returning to their normal position, nodded with nervous enthusiasm. Yes, quite focused indeed. I trust Earth will find these terms satisfactory. Oh, very satisfactory, Marina replied, signing the documents with elegant penmanship. These shipping route agreements are exactly what we had hoped to achieve, and the reduced tariff schedules are most generous. Blorg noticed that the other delegates maintained what could only be described as a respectful distance from the signing table. The Zephyrian counselor had dimmed his prismatic glow to barely perceptible levels whenever Marina looked in his direction. The Centauri representative kept checking the locations of all available exits. Even the normally assertive Andromedanes seemed content to observe the proceedings from across the room. While the diplomatic ceremonies concluded, Blorg was busy updating Zep Station's security protocols. His official report would recommend enhanced monitoring procedures for Deathworld species, but his personal notes were more direct. Humans were walking weapon systems disguised as reasonable diplomats. Future visits would require completely different precautions. 2 hours later, Marina Chen stood at the security checkpoint where her visit had begun, collecting her confiscated items from the return processor. The pile of weapons seemed somehow less impressive now, decorative accessories rather than genuine threats. Everything appears to be in order, Ambassador, Lieutenant Crix said, his tone notably more respectful than it had been during her arrival. Your plasma knife, neural disruptor, molecular destabilizer, and lunch fork. Thank you so much, Marina replied warmly, securing the items in their various holsters and pockets. This has been such an educational visit. I feel like I've learned so much about galactic diplomatic protocols. Lieutenant Crix managed a weak smile. We've all learned quite a bit today, Ambassador. Marina's transport was already docked and ready for departure. As she walked toward the boarding ramp, she paused to wave pleasantly at the security personnel who were watching her leave with obvious relief. Do give my regards to Commander Hisik when he recovers, she called out. I hope his vertigo clears up soon. From his office, Lork watched Marina's ship detach from the docking bay and accelerate toward the hyperspace jump point. He activated his personal log and began recording his final entry for the day. Diplomatic Protocol Update, Stardate 2387. 56, he dictated, his tentacles moving slowly across the control interface. Human diplomatic visits require special consideration. Recommend all future security assessments account for the fact that Deathworld species may not require conventional weapons to pose significant tactical challenges. He paused, watching Marina's ship disappear into hyperspace. Traditional confiscation procedures may be inadequate for species that have not forgotten their evolutionary heritage. In the viewport of her departing vessel, a small figure could be seen waving goodbye with cheerful diplomatic courtesy. Blorx found himself waving back, despite the fact that she couldn't possibly see him. After all, it seemed like the polite thing to do.